We have a couple of open chairs anywhere. We've got two standing at the back.
We are live now.
Erica, there's one right here too.
Got one over here too.
Okay, ready to go?
Yes, sorry about that.
Okay, once again, I'll call the meeting to order. With this, city clerk, please call the roll.
Counselor Long. Present. Counselor McLaughlin.
Present.
Counselor Runyon. Counselor Randall.
Present.
Counselor Richardson.
Present.
Mayor Mays.
Item 3, Pledge of Allegiance. I'd like to ask Counselor Scott Randall to please lead us in the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Reason this chair is vacant, it's usually occupied by our city attorney, and he is on Zoom tonight. I'd also like to point out that last week, I think we set a record for the length of our meeting. Went several hours, and tonight, I think we set another record. Our packet is 666 pages long, so I think that sets a new record. Okay, item 4 is approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
Mayor Mays.
Excuse me, we're adding an executive session to the end of the regular meeting. So I would ask that whoever makes the motion move that we approve the agenda as amended.
I move that we approve agenda as amended.
I'll second it.
It's been moved by Counselor Richardson and seconded by Counselor Randall to approve the agenda as amended. Is there any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Item 5 is audience participation. During this portion of the meeting, anyone may speak on any subject which does not later appear on the agenda. Up to 3 minutes per person will be allowed. Citizens are encouraged to ask questions with the understanding that the city can either answer the question tonight or refer that question to the appropriate staff member, who will get back to you within a reasonable amount of time. If a response by the city is requested, the speaker will be referred to the city manager for further action. The issue may appear on a future meeting agenda for city council consideration. Tonight, we have one individual, one citizen who would like to speak on one subject that is not on the agenda. And I know there's some people here who would like to speak about a variety of other subjects that are on the agenda, and you will get an opportunity to speak on those. So with that, Mr. Chuck Gomez, you want to come forward and use up your 3 minutes?
Chuck. Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Chuck Gomez of the Granada Theater, 221 East 2nd Street here in the Dalles. And I'm here to discuss nonprofit and TRT funds. Last meeting, my wife and I presented a video on tourism for the benefit of the Dalles in general. It was not a benefit to the Granada or any single historic landmark or business in town, but the town as a whole, as we feel that tourism is an untapped resource for the community, a diamond in our own backyard, the historic and landmark issues here in the community. And if developed correctly and properly and strongly, tourism could be equal to, if not greater, than the income to the community that Google now represents. That seems to be something really to wrap our minds around. A second Google bringing into the community without any strings attached, tourism. Now, when we first started the Granada, it was suggested to me by the city council and members of City Hall that we go to the Chamber of Commerce for a fund, a grant for advertising for tourism, which we did. Nowhere on the grant did it state it was for profit or nonprofit. I have been through this with other communities. I looked very closely at the application to see if there was a restriction for profit versus nonprofit organizations. There was none. At the time that I applied for those funds, there was $10,000 given to the Chamber of Commerce from the city city council from City Hall that at that point had yet been unrequested, with a maximum of $3,000 per each person. So I put our application in. It was just a week or so after that, that here in this very room, the Granada came up, and once again, the nonprofit issue was brought to attention. After several weeks, I went back to the Chamber of Commerce and said, how are those advertising funds coming? And at that time, I was told they had been turned down because they were for nonprofit. Well, several weeks ago, when we presented a tourism video that we had put together with our own funds for the strength of the community on whole,
30 seconds, okay.
for the strength of the community on whole, we were told that TRT funds are for nonprofits. I do not believe that the Girl Scouts, Cub Scouts, Little League, or even the Humane Society can generate the type of income a solid tourism plan can generate. So at this time, I hope when these funds come available, TRT funds next year, that we strongly consider at a strong tourism advertising campaign on the basis of the video that we have already presented. We just look to get the town stronger with out-of-town funds. Thank you very much for your time this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any questions for Mr. Gomez? Okay, that's it for audience participation. Item 6 is city manager's report. Mr. Klebs.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a few items this evening. One is the partnership we had with Northern Wasco PUD for the creation of a additional star at Vista Reservoir was highlighted in the Northwest Public Power Association's newsletter. And so I printed a copy of that and shared it with you on the dais here. Just want to again thank our partners at the PUD, Jerry Anderson and the Public Works staff that worked on that project. I think it's been a very nice touch this year. I attended the Federal Street Plaza ad hoc committee meeting last week. We have a web page where the community members and other interested parties can go to get the agendas and summary of that project. We also use that meeting as a pilot concept series where I had the city clerk record me giving an update, very brief update, minute and a half, on what occurred at that meeting to share on our social media accounts and to better inform the community of that project. This will be a pilot series that we kind of test out to see what the response is and how much traction it actually gains, trying to keep the community as informed as possible. In addition, I just wanted to highlight again that we have 2 new web pages on our website. One of those highlights the enterprise zone and strategic investment program agreements that we have with Google. And the other highlights the different master plans that we have currently with a focus on the water master plan that we'll be discussing this evening. That's a great resource, and we'll be improving that and pushing it out as best we can over the weeks and months. I appeared on KODL last Friday. The city clerk and I met with a new representative from American Cruise Lines to talk about the upcoming season and the partnership that we have with them for our dock. And we have the draft goal-setting document from our work session with Sarah Singer Wilson, SSW Consulting, under review and finalization to bring back to council at the start of the new year. And then finally, just for your awareness, I'll be heading on a family vacation starting December 21st, and we'll be back for the new year. Thank you very much.
Any questions for the city manager? Okay, item 7 is city council reports. We'll start on my right with President Councilor Tim McLaughlin.
I'm going to pass this week, Mayor.
Okay, Councilor Long,
Actually, that was my plan too, since the length of the meeting. I'll report next week.
Councilor Randall.
Just one item, and that was last Thursday, met with the Q-Life board, and we're still selling into the new IGA, and the board makeup will be changing. We will need to be, the city will only appoint 1 elected official. We currently have 2. That's it.
Councilor Richardson.
I'll catch up next meeting, Mr. Mayor.
Councilor Runyon.
I have a microphone.
Oh.
Can I use that one over there and put it back? Yeah, I've got a few things. Well, okay, we'll just have to shuffle it around, huh? And it's on, I believe. There we go. December 3rd, the local public safety coordinating council met, an hour-long meeting. It's called Lipstick, not lipstick, Lipstick. On the 4th of December, a phone meeting with the city manager. On the 5th, Q Life meeting that Councilor Randall just talked about a 2-hour-long meeting. On the 6th, League of Oregon Cities held an elected essentials meeting at the Readiness Center. I was there for about 3.5 hours on that one. I think it went till 5 o'clock that day. Very informative and a lot of different topics were covered. Met with the city clerk this morning and confused her greatly, but she did a great job of straightening me out. And then I met with the city attorney, and the two meetings were not related. And then citizen concerns, I met with an individual today, not related to tonight's meeting. And that's my report.
As far as my report goes, on the 26th of November, I did a radio interview with Mark Bailey on KACI. I also attended the community outreach team meeting at the community college that same day. And on this last Friday, I also attended with Councilor Runyon, the League of Oregon Cities Elected Essentials Workshop held at the Readiness Center, which the city of the Dalles hosted. And with that, we'll go to the consent agenda. Items of a routine and non-controversial nature are placed on the consent agenda that allow the city council to spend its time and energy on the more important items and issues. Any councilor may request an item be pulled from the consent agenda and be considered separately. Items pulled from the consent agenda will be placed on the agenda at the end of the action items section. Tonight, we have 5 items on the consent agenda. First is approval of the November 25th council meeting minutes. Second is approval of the November 15th City Council Goal Setting Work Session. Third is authorization for the city manager to execute a release for public access easement. Fourth is adoption of a resolution authorizing the city attorney to execute necessary actions for the city's participation in the Visa MasterCard interchange fee settlement. And finally, adoption of a resolution directing the city attorney to issue subpoenas for the production of records relating to an Airbnb. With that, I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Mr. Mayor, I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Is there a second?
I'll second. McLaughlin will second.
It's been moved by Councilor Long and seconded by Councilor McLaughlin to adopt or to pass the consent agenda. Is there any discussion? Councilor Runyon?
A question I discussed with the city attorney today, and I don't think it necessitates taking anything off the consent agenda at his direction. But on number E regarding this non-payment, et cetera, and no license and having to apply for a license, my question was, if it's all solved in a reasonable short of time, which doesn't sound like it will be, would they be under the new rules or the rules we had before? And I was assured it'd probably be after January 9th, which will be the acceptance of the new rules. So I just wanted to bring that out there because I think it's an important point.
Agree.
They've had this trouble going on for a while.
Good to know. Any other questions or comments? All those in favor of the motion to approve the consent agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay. Okay, tonight, this item is a public hearing regarding an ordinance approving a substantial amendment to the Columbia Gateway Urban Renewal Plan. Now is the time specified for the council to conduct this public hearing to consider the adoption of a general ordinance number 24-1409, an ordinance making certain determinations and findings related to and approving the Columbia Gateway Urban Renewal Plan Amendment. This public hearing is required by ORS 457.095, which authorizes the council to approve proposed substantial amendments to the urban renewal plans after public notice, this hearing, and consideration of public testimony, and any plan commission and taxing district recommendations. Anyone who wishes to testify must be recognized by me before testifying. When I recognize you, please proceed to the microphone and state your name and mailing address for the record. The hearing is also required to be recorded. Generally, the public hearing procedure will go as follows. Prior to the public hearing, we will ask for a staff report and any questions the council may have for the staff. Next, I will ask for testimony from any proponents of the proposed substantial amendment. Then I will ask for testimony from any opponents of the proposed substantial amendment. Finally, I will ask for testimony from anyone else who wishes to offer relevant testimony or ask relevant questions. To expedite the hearing, councilors may ask questions of persons as they testify. When this process has been concluded, I will close the public testimony and the council will deliberate toward a decision. These are the rules. Are there any questions? Okay, once again, we're going to hear from the staff, and then the council will ask the staff questions. Then we'll open it up to the public for people that wish to testify in favor of and opposition to the ordinance. And then we'll get back, close the public hearing, and the council will then deliberate and hopefully make a decision. So the public hearing is now open. May we please have the staff report, Mr. Spatz and Mr. Chandler.
Mr. Mayor, Dan Spatz, Economic Development Officer for the City of the Dalles. I'd like to thank you, all of you, and three of you in particular who also serve on the Urban Renewal Board for all of your time, patience, and diligence in following what has been a very long process. I'm joined by Josh Chandler, Director of the Community Development Department. Also, Elaine Howard of Elaine Howard Consulting is going to be joining us online to go through some of the background as part of the staff report. With your permission, sir. So I'd like to start with a little bit of history, recognizing time constraints tonight. We'll turn it over to Elaine then for a slide presentation on additional background of how urban renewal works, and then I'll wrap up with next steps. First off, a little bit of history. Urban renewal goes back to 1990. I'm not going to provide a detailed blow-by-blow account of everything that's happened since then, but I would like to focus first on the mission of urban renewal. Urban renewal exists to reduce, ameliorate blight in the downtown, in the district, urban renewal district. And I mentioned district as opposed to downtown district. Originally, urban renewal constituted much of the entire city. There were a number of things fall out from Measure 5, Measure 50 back in the early 90s. The upshot being that about half of the district was taken out of the district. It was reduced about half in size. And that did some very interesting things to the fiscal basis for the district at that time. There was a bond that was let. The bond was defeased almost immediately with passage of Measure 5. So some of the major accomplishments of urban renewal were delayed upwards of 10 years. There are two primary documents that drive urban renewal. One is the plan, and another is a report mandated by state statute that talks about how the implications of that plan, fiscal impact on tax districts, things like that. The plan identifies a number of projects to be accomplished through urban renewal. The last time the plan was amended was 2009. So this whole discussion around updating urban renewal started about, a year and a half ago now, because we realized that the 2009 plan did not take into account some projects that have developed since then. Basalt Commons, for instance, redevelopment of the Tony's site, things like that. Best practice is to keep the plan updated, recognizing major projects. So we started off doing that. In the process, we realized that our capacity was becoming limited. Substantial amendments, and again, as identified in 2009, established spending authority. And there's a term that you will also see quite often in the staff report. It's called maximum indebtedness. And maximum indebtedness, in this sense, does not mean new debt, does not necessarily mean bank debt. It equates to the total spending authority of the agency through time. So going back to 2009, even farther than that, the first maximum indebtedness, MI, or spending authority, was established in the late 1990s, around 1998. That was a result of new state legislation at the time. Originally, there was no MI. There was no debt ceiling, no spending limit, basically. So in 1998, the first one was established. That was followed in 2009. Now, our request tonight is to extend that maximum indebtedness, that spending authority. The reason for doing so, as of 2026, we will have collected enough revenue through urban renewal to pay off an outstanding debt owed by the agency to the city. This goes back to 2009. It was a bond issuance that allowed the city to conduct a local improvement district in the area of First Street along Bargeway Road, and also conduct a number of urban renewal projects, about $10 million worth of urban renewal projects. The debt schedule for that concludes in 2029, but we will have collected enough revenue by 2026 to repay that debt. So the question tonight is whether we continue to spend the revenue that we will collect anyway between 2026 and 2029. How do you collect revenue? It's called tax increment financing. So in 1990, the tax base for the district was established at around $25 million total valuation of the district, and around $25 million spending authority. That was, let's see, I want to back up a little bit. The total value was around $25 million. The first maximum indebtedness was established in 1998 at $14 million. That was increased in 2009 to $29 million. Tonight, we're asking for an expansion of $6.1 million for a total spending authority through time, again, over the history of the agency of $35 million. The total amount, 6.1. That's what we're asking to collect in addition to what was established in 2029. There's no new debt and there is no tax increase. TIF means that taxes that are collected anyway are deferred from the tax districts, and they're allocated to urban renewal for the projects identified in the plan. A couple of other points. Substantial amendment that we're requesting tonight may only be requested once. This is a result of state legislation that followed the substantial amendment in 2009. The upshot of that is that because we last established a substantial amendment in 2009, and the trigger point for no other substantial amendments except one was in 2010, a year later, so it's happenstance. But we are allowed to request one substantial amendment and no more. I offer that as assurance because there's a very sensitive point here, recognizing the deferral of revenue that's taking place to the tax districts, the city included. If you look at the starting basis in 1990 and the overall increase in tax value of the community, $140, $150 million now, there's an enormous loss of potential revenue to the districts, including the city. The county, upwards of $400,000 a year in lost revenue. The Port District, the Fire District, the Parks District, the city itself, minor districts. Schools are held, are equalized, and Elaine will get into that in her slide presentation. But nevertheless, you can see the impact on tax districts cumulative through time. So we want to provide the assurance that we're not going to come back in 2028 or 2029 and say, hey, can we please extend this for another 10 years? That would require another substantial amendment, and that is something we are precluded from doing under state law. So I wanted to get that on the record. A couple of other points before we go into Elaine's slide presentation. One other thing, I'd mentioned that the district sunsets in 2029, and I think that that's enough for now. I'd like to transition this over to Elaine for her slide presentation, and then I will circle back with what would occur if you approve this request for substantial amendment tonight.
Hi, I'm Elaine Howard. Can you see my slide presentation on your screen?
Yes.
Great, thank you. I have been working with Dan and Josh on this for, as Dan said, about a year and a half. I am a consultant. I've done work with you in the past, and I also work with many other urban renewal agencies in the state of Oregon. We worked on this project with Nick Popnick and Ali Danko from Tiberius Solutions. They do all of our financial analysis for the project. What I will go through is what is urban renewal. We do this especially because this is a public hearing that was noticed throughout the city. So to be able to provide anybody who is in the room or watching a background of what urban renewal is and what the process of an amendment is, to go through the plan and report, to provide a financial overview, and then to talk about what the next steps are. Urban renewal in Oregon is used as an economic development tool. It is an adopted plan, as Dan said, but it is unique in that it has financing attached to that plan. So a lot of times cities will adopt a downtown plan or a neighborhood plan, but there's no money attached to it. Urban renewal is unique in that it has a financing tool. It is used to address, as Dan said, blighting influences. You have to establish that blight occurs within the area to be able to use urban renewal. And it functions on the increases in property tax revenues within that urban renewal area. It's used all over the state, and you can see out the I-84 corridor. It's used in Hood River, it's used in the Dalles, Boardman, Hermiston, Pendleton, LeGrand, up and down the I-5 corridor and up and down 101. So it's used by most major cities within the state. As I said before, urban renewal works on property tax revenue. When we pay our taxes, that property tax revenue is typically allocated by the assessor to the regular taxing jurisdictions. Our property taxes in Oregon increase really only for two reasons. There is an allowed 3% appreciation every year, and unless we're in a deep recession, the assessor usually does allow for that 3% appreciation of our assessed values. And then the assessor can reassess any property based on substantial improvements, and that includes any new construction. Typically, that threshold is about $25,000. So if you do an improvement to your property of that amount or greater, the assessor can reassess your assessed value of your property. When an urban renewal area is formed within a city, the assessor identifies what the total assessed value is within that urban renewal area and establishes what's called a frozen base assessed value. That does not mean anybody's property taxes are frozen. It just means at that point in time, the tax revenues off of those properties goes into two different revenue streams. The property taxes from the frozen base continue going to the regular taxing districts. The property taxes from any increase in that property assessed value go to the urban renewal agency to do projects, programs, and administration of that urban renewal plan. This shows that concept in a little different form. This shows when an urban renewal area starts down here at the bottom, excuse me, and it shows that tax revenue over time. This shows that 3% amount of revenue that's foregone by taxing districts, because that would be what they would be getting within an urban renewal area if it wasn't going to the urban renewal agency. This also shows in the dark gold that the amount of property tax revenue above that 3% is really considered what you are able to incentivize or to make happen within that urban renewal area that gets additional tax revenue. At the time that you meet your maximum indebtedness, which Dan talked about a little bit, but that is a total amount of money you're allowed to spend on projects, programs, and administration in the area. All of that additional tax revenue will be freed up to go to the different taxing jurisdictions. So the impact of urban renewal is not on an individual property tax payer. So if anyone's come to this meeting thinking that urban renewal will increase their property taxes, it does not increase your property taxes. It takes money that would otherwise go to other taxing districts and diverts it within that urban renewal area only and allows the urban renewal agency to use that money. So they forego that growth in taxes, the taxing districts. That growth over that 3% may not have occurred, but for those projects that urban renewal is able to help incentivize. School districts are different, as Dan said. They're an indirect impact, and they're an indirect impact because they are funded through the state school fund on a per pupil basis that is established throughout the state. So this is what happens on regular taxing districts. That local property tax revenue would go strictly to the taxing jurisdiction. Urban renewal impacts that up here at the front. For a local school district, there are other sources and an equalization formula. So your schools are indirectly impacted because the amount of money that goes into that state school fund is reduced, but that money is substantially backfilled by other funding sources so that the school districts are able to get the funding on a per pupil basis that's authorized through the legislature. An urban renewal area functions on an income source. That income source is the yearly property tax revenues that the assessor allocates to the agency. It has an annual budget and has expenses, programs, projects, administration, and it has that spending limit. That is the total amount of money that can be spent. Urban renewal allows a city to leverage their own tax rate by the tax rates of other entities. So if this was $1 of taxes, the city tax rate in this case, and this is a generic example, it's not specific to the Dalles, but in this generic example, the tax rate for the city is 39%. Urban renewal allows them to capture that full dollar of increased tax revenues. So they're able to get an additional 61% of what those taxes would be on properties within the urban renewal area. I saw that the assessor's office has joined us, so hopefully, I think they've seen this presentation before, but if not, and they want to comment, I'm happy to let them chime in at any point. One of the questions that we are often asked is, why is urban renewal on our property tax bill? Because we're not in an urban renewal area. There's a two-part explanation to that. The first part explanation is that the assessor has to, every year, take every single property within the urban renewal area and analyze what that growth is from the point, well, they do it on the basic boundary, but what the growth in assessed value is. So this is just an example that shows at an initial year in an urban renewal area how that might happen. We use a property value of $100,000. In this particular generic example, that tax rate is 13.1048. So on a property value of 100,000, the taxes would be 1,310.48. We use 100,000 because that's easily multiplied by whatever that might be within your own particular locality. If there's no urban renewal area and that property goes up that 3%, the assessor is allowed to increase every year. Then each taxing jurisdiction will get 3% more, and that total property tax bill will increase by that 3%. If this property happened to go within the urban renewal area when it was established, that 3% increase, which in this bill totals $39.31, wouldn't go to all the taxing jurisdictions. It would go to the urban renewal agency. So you can see that the other taxing jurisdictions would continue getting that value at the time that the property was valued when it went into the urban renewal area. The assessor's office has to do that for every property within the area and decide how much money should go to urban renewal. And then they have to take that amount. So in your case, let's say that amount is $100,000. and they have to spread that out to every property tax bill within the city of the Dalles. That is as a result of those measures 5, 47, and 50, and a lawsuit that was brought by Shiloh Inns that said that urban renewal could not be held outside of those property tax limitations. It had to be considered within that. So you can see that the property taxes this property pays with and without an urban renewal is the same. So if urban renewal, when it goes away in the future, whether that's in a couple of years or in 2029, people will not see a reduction in their property tax bills, but the taxing districts will see an increase in the amount of money that they will receive from the assessor's office. An urban renewal plan amendment has to go through a specific process. Then part of that is to allow public input at every stage of that process. The agency has to review the amendment and decide whether to send it out for public review, and they did vote to send it out for public review. We have to present it to the county, and we did that last week. Has to go to the Planning Commission for review of conformance with the comprehensive plan, and the Planning Commission did review this and passed a resolution that it did conform to the comprehensive plan. And then to the City Council for a hearing and vote and notice of this hearing to all citizens. I'm going to take a quick drink. The actual plan update is to the goals and objectives to the project, an increase in the maximum indebtedness, and then general updating. This picture is just one of the successes of the urban renewal area. This shows the prior state of the Sunshine Mill Winery before it was improved and what that looks like now. So in addition to a great visual impact to the city, it's brought new jobs and economy to the city and tourists. For the projects that are being considered, there's a continuation of the incentive program with downtown property rehabilitation projects. This has been a key project that the agency is wanting to move ahead with, and Dan and Josh have created quite a bit of momentum on that potential project. This is one of the potential future projects, which is the Sigmund's Oak Hotel, just a rendering of it. In addition to those projects, there would be new projects added to the plan. So the Basalt Commons project, a mixed-use commercial residential development, the Tony's Town and Country building acquisition, demolition, and site rehabilitation, First Street reconstruction to include sidewalk replacement, street and substreet reconstruction, tree plantings with irrigation, infrastructure and public safety measures, and then on the Federal Street Plaza to be able to use urban renewal funds to help leverage external resources such as state and federal grants by contributing to those local match requirements. Urban renewal is a very successful tool for helping to leverage other funds, so that is a great way to use urban renewal. The Granada Theater is one of the past projects and for the Urban Renewal Agency. And the Commodore Hotel is also a past project, again, turning a vacant and abandoned building into a useful resource for your city. The report on the plan is a financial document, basically, that provides data to support the findings of blight and the financial projections within the plan. These pictures just show a couple of visual representations of blight within the urban renewal area. This is the First Street Pier area where it is in a damaged condition, and then the Last Stop building. Maximum indebtedness, again, is the total amount of money you're allowed to spend within an area. We are asking for an increase in $6.1 million, a little more. This would extend taking tax increment revenues through fiscal year in 2029. So although this maximum indebtedness number here looks large and is large, that's not the amount of money they have to spend. It's the amount of money that they've spent over the life of the area, and the amount that they actually have to spend is this, and this, as we move month by month, this number has to end up changing a little bit. So at the time we did the amendment, this amount was just a little under $11 million. In the report on the plan, there is a page that shows what the expected expenditures are on. And you can see that they are divided into incentive program projects, the Geyer Building, Basalt Commons Development Agreement, incentive program for Basalt Commons, the 3rd and Jefferson parking lot redevelopment, parking lot resurfacing, the First Street project, Federal Street Plaza, and then administration for the area. I think we're going to wait and go over those later, so I'm going to stop sharing at this point and turn it back over to Dan and Josh.
Thank you, Elaine. So I'd like to talk next about where we go from here. If the council approves the request tonight, which would require a unanimous vote of the councilors attending, this being a non-emergency ordinance, lacking unanimous vote, we can come back at a later time. Of course, our request would be your consideration tonight. Elaine had mentioned the various steps leading up to this, going before the Planning Commission, County Commission briefing. We had hand-delivered all of the information to all of the tax districts on October 22nd, and we did a general mailing to the city residents. Started all of that with the agency itself, and the vote at that time was majority 8-1 in favor of this. And I should note that that included tax districts that are negatively affected by this. Despite the impact on the tax districts, they agreed to support this. One exception, of course, being the fire district, and we recognize that completely. The fire district understands the value of urban renewal. Nevertheless, they do take a hit, and their preference is that we sunset urban renewal as quickly as possible. I wanted to get that on the record. County Commission was not unanimous on this. They had kind of took a straw poll. It was not a formal vote of the County Commission, but 2-1 on that one. One of the commissioners is concerned over the ability of urban renewal to follow through on the things that we say we're going to do. And I would like to go into that a little bit later. You have a list of potential projects, and we have a strategy for making those investments. So I think at this point, we get into the really interesting part of trying to review the attachments in the packet. There are a lot of attachments to exhibits, and the other way around. And I'd like to kind of go through those if you think that would be helpful. I don't know how much time you've had to ponder all of this information, but just I could run through a summary, a page by page summary, if you think that would be helpful. So in the packet, the general ordinance that we're asking you to consider tonight, and this is actually the ordinance that would achieve the substantial amendment, Ordinance 24-1409, is on pages 47 to 49 of your packet. The amendment is all of the sections of the plan as adopted in 2009 that we are now proposing for revision. So the amendment that would be adopted through the ordinance and the plan itself are almost the same document, not quite. The opening few pages of the plan are not reflected in the amendment because they haven't changed, and a few pages right at the end, but almost everything in between. It's where we've added projects, we've updated goals and objectives, and we talk about the maximum indebtedness expansion itself. So you'll see both of those in the packet. There are a series of maps. These are required. They're part of the 2009, and we keep them for continuity. They're talking about zoning, the district boundary itself, the comprehensive plan. Exhibit B is on pages 80 to 112. This is the report, the fiscal report that accompanies the plan. All of the components of the report are mandated by state statute. So the impact on taxing districts, the timeline for completion of projects, the value of those projects. And at that point, I'd note that one of those projects is an umbrella term, property rehabilitation. And that's a big one because those are all the private sector investments that we're talking about achieving. We don't try to list those in the plan itself because they change year to year, month to month, sometimes week to week. We have about 15 right now that we're pursuing very actively. Some of them are frankly on pause right now. And as soon as we have this straightened out, this approval, if you grant approval, we will be able to proceed immediately with at least 2 of those. Exhibit C is the Planning Commission resolution. Going on to attachment 2, that's the plan itself. So the exhibit for the plan is on the, let's see, the plan is on pages 117 through 153. The property description, that is the description of the district, pages 154 to 159. We repeat the maps. We worked and worked trying to figure out how to avoid repetition in this thing. And by the time you get all through the way documents have to be presented, it was impossible to avoid repetition. So the maps appear several times in these documents. Exhibit E on page 163. This is an interesting one because it shows all of the projects identified in 1990, and you'll see a vast number of those were public investment, public infrastructure projects. And then 1998, the Fourth Amendment to the plan shows how those projects evolved. Most of them carried through. Interesting point here because most of the emphasis in 1990 was on public sector projects, wastewater treatment plant, water treatment plant, streets, traffic signals, a lot of other stuff. That kind of changed through time with a growing emphasis on private sector investment, reducing blight and increasing tax value of the district. That's where we stand now. 1 or 2 large public projects, First Street certainly comes to mind, but trying to work in as many private projects as we can. Exhibit F repeats some of the same information from Exhibit E. Exhibit F is the original 1990 project list. That's on page 164, starts on page 164. Attachment 3, starting on page 170, is a red-line version of the plan. So you see what we are changing in the plan, and all of those changes then become the amendment to the plan. Attachment 4, the report is repeated. We could not find a way to get around repeating the darn information. Attachment 5, pages 221 to 222, that's the Urban Renewal Board resolution that I mentioned just a while ago. Attachment 6, page 223, this is the project list. These are our projects we have identified over the past year. Some of them pending right now, some of them deferred because we did not have the capacity to go forward with them. We will if we have a positive vote on this matter. And this is not a comprehensive list. I can promise there will be new projects, but these are the ones that we're focusing on right now. And again, contingent upon approval, the next step would be to basically budget these out in a 5-year investment plan, which we have established using a spreadsheet. Finally, attachment 7 is revenue sharing on pages 225 to 226. And Elaine, I will defer to her on exactly how this works. For my part, I would say that because, again, of changes in state legislation, we've reached certain trigger points in the amount of revenue bringing in that requires us to share revenue with the tax districts in advance of the district sunsetting in 2029. And there's a formula by which that is accomplished. I mentioned that approval tonight would require a unanimous vote of councilors present. If we have success, a successful vote that is, there would be a 30-day referendum period during which time 10%, and I've deferred to Jonathan, I believe it's 10% of the population of the city would need to sign a petition to have a successful referendum to council. If there is a vote tonight, we would publish notice of that within 4 days of tonight's hearing. And again, if there is a successful vote, our next order of business would be to bring the projects list and the spreadsheet I mentioned to the Urban Renewal Board on December 17th to put all of this into overdrive. The idea being to put as much investment between now and 2029 and fully justify the achievements and the abilities of urban renewal to increase our tax base. The district has been around so long that we forget things like the underpass under Union Street, the Maritime Terminal, Sunshine Mill, the roundabout. All of those have been urban renewal projects. Urban renewal hasn't provided 100% of the funding on any of those, but it leveraged additional funding. It has provided funding for many others. 72 projects comes to mind. We've created an interactive map. I think you may have a link to that shows all of the projects accomplished through time. We are asking for an opportunity to wrap that up with one final series of investments in the district. As part of the consult and confer required from the tax districts, they had 45 days to submit recommendations. We have not received any recommendations. If we had, that would need to have been reflected in the ordinance. Deadline was December 6th. With that, I would like to go back to Elaine, if you don't mind, to go over the fiscal tables briefly and then into questions and answers. Elaine?
I'm here.
Would you like to go ahead with the fiscal tables?
I would.
Thank you, Elaine.
Yes. This series of information shows the projected impacts of the amendment only on the taxing districts that represent general government. So you can see there are no impacts in fiscal year in 2025 because that is being covered by maximum indebtedness authority that you still have remaining. So the impacts of the amendment actually start in fiscal year in 2026, and only about half of that year is allocated to this new maximum indebtedness. The other half is allocated to your existing maximum indebtedness. And that's why you can see if you look at the city of the Dalles, the first year is $203,000, and in the and in 2027 is $307,000. So that's the reason that goes up, and then that stays stable for 1 year, and then it goes down that final year in fiscal year in 2029 because you reach your maximum indebtedness and don't need the full amount of money that fiscal year to reach the maximum indebtedness. So we have put together this information. This was transmitted to each different taxing district. This is the information for the city of the Dalles. So the impact of the amendment itself is about $1 million. On education, as we had said before, the school district and the education school district are backfilled through the state school fund. The community college has a similar college funding program, and they also receive their funding on a per class taken basis. So they are also indirectly impacted. So even though they're indirectly impacted, the amount of money that they can bring to the table to an urban renewal area is large. It's $2 million for the taxing district's education side. This shows if you decided not to do the amendment, the final impacts to the different general government taxing districts. So again, those impacts would be in 2025, and then a smaller impact in 2026 because they would reach their maximum indebtedness that year. So those impacts would be for the city, $410,000. The same information is provided for the education school districts. These two tables, and all of these are in that big batch of attachments that Dan was going through. These tables exist in the report in those attachments. But this goes through the full impact, so the remaining maximum indebtedness of what you have and the new maximum indebtedness, if you choose to pass that. You can see that the total amount that the city of the Dalles would forego is the same each year until the final year when the district would meet the maximum indebtedness. That is due to the revenue sharing, and I'll go through that on in two different slides. So the total impact of moving ahead, taking your existing maximum indebtedness and the new to the city of the Dalles would be about $1.5 million. And this shows that full impact on the education districts. And again, this is substantially backfilled, and that's about $3 million. When in 2019, the Special Districts Association of Oregon asked for some changes to urban renewal law. One of those was to institute revenue sharing, which says if you do a substantial amendment to a existing urban renewal plan, you must start revenue sharing a portion of your tax increment revenues with all of the other impacted taxing districts at certain threshold amounts. That threshold amount would happen the very first year that this amendment would go into effect. So that revenue sharing amount for the city of the Dalles is shown over here. This amount doesn't get subtracted from those other amounts. Those other amounts are amounts that you would forego. This just means the amount of taxes allocated to you would be a little higher than they would have been if there wasn't any revenue sharing within the district. The way the revenue sharing will be implemented is the Urban Renewal Agency will have to fill out the UR 50 form that goes to the assessor's office every year and establish how much money they want allocated to the Urban Renewal Agency and how much then goes back to the other taxing jurisdictions. So I'm going to stop share there, but if any of the city council members want me to bring any of those finance tables back up, I'm happy to do that.
At this point, we would invite questions from council.
Okay, again, we're not here to, at this point, we're not deliberating. We are just going to ask questions before we get to the public testimony. So does anybody on the city council have any questions for the staff or Ms. Howard? Counselor, oh, I'm sorry.
Not at this time.
Oh. Counselor Runyon?
Yeah.
I know the answer to this, but people in the audience may not. So the purpose of the whole project, urban renewal, is to help business, increase business and increase revenue, et cetera. And you explained how schools are handled a different way. That's handled through the state tax fund. But as a way of improving business and improving the downtown and surrounding area and whatnot, can the urban renewal, let's say the school district decide to go out for another bond but need some upfront money, can urban renewal be used for that kind of thing? That question comes up.
The answer to that is no.
No.
Urban renewal can only be used for capital expenditures and your own internal staffing needs. So they cannot be used to help the school district pass a bond. But the good information is it used to be that urban renewal did take money from any bonds or local option levies, and they no longer do that. So if a bond is passed, then all of that money will go directly to the school district to be able to pay on that bond. So
Yeah.
that is also a change that we actually helped pass in the legislature.
The reason I brought that up is when we talk about deteriorating buildings, we have some schools that are in that need, but we need to get that out there that this is not a use for that. Thank you.
Counselor, I appreciate your asking the question. Every meeting, I learn something new about urban renewal. Thanks to Elaine. being there to educate. Appreciate it.
I have a couple here. I thought I heard you say that by law, we cannot extend the urban renewal past 2029. Did I hear you say that?
We cannot have a second substantial amendment. This is the one time that we can bring a substantial amendment request forward if it's approved. And that results from a change in the law. And again, looking to Elaine, I believe the trigger point was 2010. We have that window when the last substantial amendment was in 2009, and the deadline for additional was in 2010. Elaine?
Yes, that's correct. And on the 2029 date that we expect this to terminate, our financial projections are basically just the 3% increase that happens annually. So unless there's a huge financial change, we anticipate that it really will meet its maximum indebtedness in 2029. And there are a couple of cushions there for you in case something happens. The first cushion is if tax receipts go down, the amount ends up really impacting that revenue sharing, not the amount that the agency has to spend on projects. So that's your first cushion. And the second cushion is in that final year, we don't anticipate that the agency would need that full collection of tax increment revenues. So if anything went down again, we have that second cushion in. So we're pretty confident that it actually would end in fiscal year end 2029. We can't account for everything. I unfortunately had to work with the city of Talent when their whole downtown burned down in an urban renewal area, and that certainly wasn't anything any of us anticipated. But for regular operation, this really should end in fiscal year end 2029.
To build upon that, any unexpended revenues at that point are distributed among the tax districts. Also, Director Chandler reminds me of the distinction between the district and the agency. We're talking about closing the district in 2029. The agency can continue basically a shell. We would not have the funding to accomplish anything. The agency could continue. You could look at establishing a new district somewhere else in the city or within some footprint of the existing district. That's a discussion for another day. But termination of the district in 2029 does not mean termination necessarily of the agency in 2029.
What's the staff's attitude? And Jonathan may want to weigh in here about putting something in the ordinance that would prevent us from going beyond 2029.
That would prevent you from
doing another substantial amendment or extending the life of the district.
Just as a guarantee beyond the, it's, Josh?
We can't.
It's illegal.
And Elaine may want to comment on that.
Okay, Josh, why don't you use the microphone?
Yeah. So correct me if I'm wrong on this, Elaine. We would not be able to extend no matter what past 2029. Whether or not there's language in the ordinance, but we wouldn't be opposed to it. But
yeah, the problem is the statute can always be changed. So if the statute was changed to take away that provision that you can only increase your maximum indebtedness once, then presumably you could do something. So right now with the existing statute, it says that you can do this once, and this is the once. So within what there exists now, there is no ability other than if there is some financial catastrophe that allowed it to take longer to get that $6.1 million, but there's no capacity to increase that amount of maximum indebtedness. So I guess if you wanted to be ultra sure, barring any statutory changes, I mean, you could put something in the ordinance that says, and this is the last, and the city attorney's on the line, so I'd like have him help me figure out what you would say, but this is the last increase to the maximum indebtedness for this particular plan.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, Jonathan.
yeah, we could totally do that. It's not a problem if that's what the council would like to do. It sort of imposes this local requirement, or I guess a local restriction. We'd be basically handcuffing ourselves. That's fine. But the law as it currently is prevents us from doing it anyway. Elaine's absolutely right. I suppose, barring an act of legislative, intervention, the law doesn't allow it currently, but the law could change tomorrow, for example, but it's extremely unlikely. There's no harm in including it if you want to, but it would just be sort of a political statement, if anything, really. Alternatively, the council can just decide not to do it in the future too. There's really no reason to include it in the ordinance, but there's no reason not to include it too. We could totally do that.
Okay, thanks. I'll let the rest of the council weigh in on that if they're interested.
Yeah, and as far as staff's concerns, I mean, we've this whole entire process, we have been stating that this will end in 2029. So staff does not have an objection if we do add something into the ordinance.
Okay, another want to reiterate that adopting this ordinance and approving a substantial amendment would not have any effect on any of the property owners that currently own property within the urban renewal district. Is that correct?
That is correct. No increase in taxes, as Elaine mentioned. There is taxes are diverted from the districts, but there is no additional tax.
Of course, the other people that are affected by this are the taxing bodies who voted 8-1 to endorse this proposal. You mentioned a few minutes ago, Dan, you used the phrase "take a hit" when you were talking about the taxing bodies. When I use the phrase "take a hit" in this context, I would think that their revenues would go down. But in fact, they will receive their proportionate share of tax increment revenue in 2029.
That's correct.
So really the hit that they're taking is that they're
It's short term.
Yeah, it's a 3-year delay.
That is correct. Yeah,
The assessed value will grow during that 3-year period, isn't that right?
that's correct.
So the revenues that they're not getting in 2026 will in fact increase to the extent that the assessed value of the district goes up over that 3-year period.
When TIF is released, be it in 2029 or earlier, then they do indeed receive that cumulative pent up increase starting back in 1990.
Right. Okay. I think that's an important distinction.
It is.
And it's like getting interest on that money that they should be getting in or could be getting in 2026 and won't be getting for 3 years. So good. Okay. Any other questions or comments or just questions, I should say?
Well, I just wanted to make a clarification. The Urban Renewal Agency is, when you said 8-1, that was the Urban Renewal Agency. That was not the individual taxing districts, because there are 3 city council representatives and 2 citizens on there. So,
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for pointing that out. Okay.
but only one agency objected when went to directly.
Okay.
They were a representative of a taxing district, that one negative vote.
Okay, at this point, we are going to ask for anyone in the audience to come forward and testify. First, I'm going to ask if anyone wishes to testify in favor of this proposed substantial amendment. Please come forward. Mr. Zukin. Please give us your name and address for the record.
It's Chris Zukin, 5525 Cherry Heights Road, the Dalles, Oregon. General manager for advertising. Was hoping I could use Mr. Kara's microphone, but I'll use this. I'm generally completely in favor of the urban renewal plan. It's done great things in the Dalles. Mentioned several of them tonight already. National Neon Sign Museum, the Granada, the Recreation, the Commodore. Several of those buildings would basically be pigeon coops today if it wasn't for urban renewal. So it's been a great success. Going forward, I'm in favor of maximizing the indebtedness of the current plan. We do have a building that we are possibly on a list. It might be on a list. We own the old post office building, Second Street. Seek to remodel the second floor. First floor has been completely done. I don't know if you've been in there, but it's beautiful. I'd like to make the second floor. So we're in favor.
Thank you, sir. For those of you that are standing in the back, or even in the hallway, we do have some open chairs here up front. So if you're interested. Okay, would anybody else like to testify in favor of the proposed ordinance? Yes, Mr. Gleason.
I'm Eric Gleason, 704 Case Street, the Dalles, Oregon. Yeah, I'm a landowner on First Street, one of the few. And I just while I have some problems with the urban renewal plan for the First Street work, it's clear that something needs to be done there. It's been kind of a neglected and blighted area for a long time, and it does need these improvements to the sidewalks and lighting and all of that kind of stuff. My objections are mainly the stone retaining walls, but I'm currently working with staff to kind of address some of those concerns. Overall, I think what urban renewal has done in the past is commendable, and what it plans to do in the future is commendable as well. It's a good thing, and I think this extension will help them kind of finish out straight.
Thank you. I'd like to remind the city council that they have if they'd like to ask any of the speakers questions, feel free to chime in. Okay, would anybody else like to testify in support of the ordinance?
Zoom.
Oh, Greg Price on Zoom. Go ahead, Mr. Price.
Thank you all. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I guess I can't turn my video on, but my name's Gregory Price. I'm the director of the Small Business Development Center. I also own a commercial building on Main Street, and I am an advocate for the urban renewal program, and would urge the city council members to lift the maximum indebtedness. I've had the privilege of working with many of our small businesses on Main Street and within the urban renewal district, and know how impactful this funding can be for a wide range of projects that I know simply aren't going to happen without this support, and will yield significant results in terms of economic impact for these small businesses that are cornerstone businesses within our community. And of course the impact it'll have for those small business owners, and personally having a commercial building downtown, I know that there's a tremendous amount that this project can do that can support me with as investing into this business in this space that I simply won't be able to do without it as well. So thank you for your time, and I hope you all approve this.
Thank you, Mr. Price. Is there anyone else who would like to testify in support of the ordinance? Well, we'll get to you. The middle comes at the end. Yes, sir. Come forward.
Michael Leash, 306 Court Street. We have the Sigmund's Flowers Oaks Hotel building and another building adjacent to it. But as you can see, the Sigmund's Flowers building is under current renovation of the exterior, and we have plans to gut and remodel the main floor, in addition to adding 4 additional housing units upstairs and doing a full renovation of that, which is a significant investment. And obviously having urban renewal continue and potentially have the opportunity to participate with the grant programs that are available, that have been available within the urban renewal would be greatly beneficial for us being able to fully execute our plan for the renovation of the addition of the 4 units upstairs. In addition to the Sigmund's building, we have the building next door, where we have renovating that building from the front exterior of the building as well as the interior. And we've met with an engineer to has gone through the building and have a plan to add 4 to 5 additional housing units also in that building. And obviously, we would potentially be interested in coming forward to urban renewal and hopefully having the opportunity to participate with the grant program that may be available through the extension of the urban renewal timeframe.
Where's that second building, did you say?
Go to, so right next door.
Right next door. Okay. Yep. Great. Thank you. Anybody else like to testify in support of the ordinance? Last call. Okay. Would anybody like to come forward and testify in opposition to the ordinance? Anybody? Okay.
All that.
Does anybody wish to testify or ask questions on this matter that is not in favor or in opposition to the ordinance? That's where you come in. Ms. Lawrence? Please state your name and address for the record.
Yes, sir. Donna Lawrence, 2017 View Court. Can you hear me okay?
Mhm.
So, Mr. Spots, you mentioned 2026. That's not like a possibility to phase out urban renewal at that time, is it? If you didn't get this.
Yes, actually. 2026 is the point at which the agency will have collected sufficient TIF revenue to pay off the bonded obligation it has to the city dating from 2009. So at that point, we could, yes, close down the district at that point.
It didn't come out real clear in your talk, but that sounds pretty cool too. So in 2029, you have stated, and it sounds pretty clear that it has to phase out in 2029. That, that's the popular belief. I have a question. So does that mean that the agencies that this urban renewal money is coming off of, that what I've called them taxing districts, but is that a better term?
Tax districts is,
Okay.
yeah. Mhm.
So in 2029, that money is no longer going to come off of those districts, correct?
That's correct.
So would it be possible to lower the percentage rate that those districts are getting at that time or close to that time so that our taxes will go down? Because they're going to be getting a big hit, right? In 2029, although, yeah, the money won't be.
I wouldn't classify it as a.
Okay, in 2029, if there's no longer urban renewal, they're going to get the money, what they get now, and the money on top of that that's going to urban renewal, right? Is that how it works?
They're not getting any money now. They would get the money in 2029. So
That's what I said.
Yeah, right. So
Okay. That being said,
you're suggesting they could lower taxes in lieu of the fact
I'm
they're getting this?
suggesting that if they've done without that extra money all this time, possibly they wouldn't have to have that extra money in the future. Therefore, our taxes would be lower. That's what I'm asking.
That's a decision that each individual taxing bodies makes by their elected boards.
I understand that, but is that a possibility? Because, people are suffering economically, so it would just be a good thing to consider.
Ms. Howard, did you want to comment on that?
I just wanted to comment on the first part of her question and make it clear that fiscal year in 2029, still the taxes go to the agency. So it's fiscal year in 2030 that they don't actually get it. And I just wanted to make sure everybody understood that portion, and the other portion, I don't think there is any statutory provision for those taxing districts to decide because of urban renewal, they're going to lower their taxes. I hear what you're saying, but I have to tell you, I've never, ever seen that happen.
Of course. Well, they wouldn't need to lower what they're getting, but I'm saying there could be a whatever, so that they wouldn't, that we wouldn't be, as a citizen, we wouldn't have to be paying as much in taxes. Their rates could, percentage rate could be lower. It's just a thought. I think it's a darn good thought.
Thank you. I'm sure 5 years from now, when 2029 rolls around and all the citizens who have an interest in this can certainly go to the individual taxings that are listed on your tax bill and lobby them accordingly. Anybody else like to speak in either not in favor or not in opposition or ask questions of this? Yes, ma'am. Come forward, please.
Like to see a picture of what you're going to do. Excuse me, my name's Janet Nieder. I'm on East 7th Street, the Dalles. And I mean, you talk about all this money, you're going to spend all this money. What's it going to look like?
I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor. I didn't catch any of that. I don't know who's speaking or what her question is.
Could you speak right into the microphone, please?
I'd like to see a rendition of what this is going to look like. You're going to spend all this money and we don't even know what it's going to look like. Okay?
One of the projects, sorry about that. One of the projects is right across the street, Sigmund's Hotel. So the upper story of that would be upper story residential. We have architects renderings of some of that.
So that's included.
Yeah.
In First Street, that's included.
I will.
Sixth Street is included.
I'll back up just a little bit.
All right.
If this is approved tonight, then we'll bring a projects list before the Urban Renewal Board on the 17th. And that would be the next phase in terms of identifying projects. And as those projects are identified and developed, yes, we'll have visuals.
Okay, so you're not going to make First Street into like a park setting with benches and tearing down buildings and such.
Tearing down buildings, no, and referring quickly to Josh over here.
You know, I mean,
There's-
We have some renderings of the plan for First Street.
Yeah.
Depending on funding.
Not renderings per se. We have, the city has, engineered plans for First Street.
I understand that, but
Yep.
what do they look like?
Well, you can come in at any
Yeah,
time and
feel free to
see
stop
the
by. We can
renders.
share them.
The other thing is that it was my understanding from several meetings ago that Google was going to be submitting money or granting money to the city for urban renewal. And wasn't that amount like 6 million?
No, I think you're confusing that's not for urban renewal. That's I think it's the initial fee that they'll be paying the city and the county for the 2 data centers that are going in right now. That has nothing to do with urban renewal.
It's a repayment?
It's part of the negotiations that we did with Google where they're going to pay the $6 million for the 2 data centers initially.
Big ones?
Yes, ma'am.
Yep.
You're welcome. Anybody else? Last call. Okay, is the city council ready to deliberate? With that, I will close the public hearing. Comments and questions of the city council for the staff?
James Mines, good.
Okay.
No, I understand.
I just have a quick comment. I don't serve on the Urban Renewal Committee, but I do serve on the Historic Landmarks Commission. And so to get to the previous speaker's questions about having a look at the plans, each one of these entities comes forward to in this case, the Historic Landmarks Commission, presents their documents, their drawings, their concepts, and that's a good chance to attend those meetings. You can see those concepts and drawings and so forth. And I think they're also available online afterwards. So.
Thank you. Councilor Richardson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of quick comments, if you don't mind. First of all, just for the listening public, it's not so much that most city councilors tonight are not that curious. It's that we've read a lot and sat through kind of the same presentation more or less a couple of times, so we feel kind of familiar with it. Second comment is just this, most decisions have costs and benefits, and this one does too. We've been talking about the costs to the individual taxing districts, including to the city. But in this case, the benefits, in my opinion, outweigh the costs. This extension will be good for the city, it'll be good for the community, and then it will sunset. So in a few years, there will be a cumulative and substantial shot of investment downtown, mostly, not entirely, but substantially on private property, and then we'll be wrapped up and done. And all of that sounds good to me, and I'm going to support this.
Thank you.
I just have a quick one. What impact will the passage of this amendment have on the general tax liability of the average taxpayer? I heard that 3 times, but I just want to make sure we're clear.
There is no impact to individual taxpayers. The impact between now and 2029 is to the districts, as their revenues that they would receive are instead diverted to urban renewal. To the mayor's point, after 2029, they receive the release of TIF funding to their benefit. Individual taxpayers do not have an impact from urban renewal.
That's what I needed to know.
So I have some comments as the chair of the Urban Renewal Agency. I know that urban renewal has a history here in town, sometimes not so good. But over the last few years, we have really tightened up how things have been. We haven't been giving away buildings for $1 or any of that. We've been really focusing on increasing the tax base, the value of the properties. And we have a really good board right now. I'm really pleased with this board. We've worked hard to put together the incentives for the downtown businesses, as well as look at the infrastructure like First Street that really does have some safety issues right now that we need to take care of. And that we simply don't have either between urban renewal and even with the city chipping in. We discovered this maximum indebtedness problem not that long ago, really. We actually thought we were going to have this much money to spend. It was only when we discovered that there was a difference between what we were going to collect and what had been put down on paper as the maximum indebtedness of what we could spend, that we were not going to have all the money that Urban Renewal Agency had been told we were going to have to do all these projects and this vision that we had created for the downtown. And so by passing the maximum indebtedness, it's essentially what we were all expecting in the first place, but it's letting urban renewal finish out strong the way that we've been intending to. We will end on time. And it's not just, we understand that the agencies are giving up some money right now, but I am very confident that what we have, and you can come to our meeting on the 17th and see our project list, is all going to have to go into this plan. We have to put it in there. It's a substantial amendment. If it's not in there, we can't do it. So I firmly believe that the things we are putting in there right now are going to increase the tax base, which means that all of those agencies are going to be able to have a higher base to collect their tax percentage on when we're done in 2030. And that combined with the Google money that as Google is coming online, and those taxes are really going to bump up our agencies throughout the city. And we are very aware of our partners, and we are aware as city councilors what that means for us. But as someone who grew up in the Dalles and plans to retire here and has kids that she wants to stay here, this is good for the Dalles. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Anybody else? I just want to comment that I think it's really imperative that the city fulfill its obligation to finish the First Street project that we started many years ago and made a commitment to complete. Okay. Anything else? Anybody like to make a motion?
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to adopt General Ordinance number 24-1409, a general ordinance approving a substantial amendment to the Columbia Gateway Urban Renewal Plan by title only as presented.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Been moved by Counselor Randall and seconded by Counselor Richardson to adopt the ordinance approving a substantial amendment to the Columbia Gateway Urban Renewal Plan. We're going to do this by title only unless there is a member of the city council who would like to have the ordinance read in its entirety. Would anybody prefer that?
No.
Oh, thank you.
Would anybody in the audience like, just kidding. Okay, go ahead. City clerk, please read.
General Ordinance Number 24-1409, an ordinance making certain determinations and findings relating to and improving the Columbia Gateway Urban Renewal Plan Amendment.
All those in favor of the ordinance, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Mr. Spots, Mr. Chandler, and thank you, Ms. Howard. Item 10A on the agenda is to consider the adoption of the updated water master plan. I'd like to ask our Director of Public Works and our consultants to please identify yourselves for the record.
Dave Anderson, Public Works Director for the City of the Dalles. Ryan Ginter with Consor.
Emily Flock with Consor.
Nobody's on Zoom, right?
Deb Gallardi is on Zoom.
Oh, Deb Gallardi. Oh, there she is. Okay, Deb Gallardi with the one of the consultants is also on Zoom. So we have three consultants with us today. Mr. Anderson, would you like to give the staff report?
Yes, thank you.
Mr. Anderson, it appears your mic might be muted.
The previous presenters apparently wore it out.
There you go. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Jonathan. Honorable members of council, we're here tonight to present to the city council for consideration the final draft of an update to the city's water system master plan. Staff's been working with Consor for nearly 2 years developing the draft plan. In that time, the city's water system infrastructure has been evaluated for capacity, remaining service life, seismic and climate resiliency, and projected the city's future water demands. Prior to tonight, we've had 3 public meetings with the city council to bring us to the point of having a draft plan for your consideration. It includes a recommended draft capital improvement plan and a financial plan. Since there's a lot of overlap between the staff report that I provided to the council prior to this meeting and the presentation tonight, I'm going to end my review of the staff report and just turn it over for the presentation. Following the presentation, the council will have an opportunity to have a public hearing, and following that hearing, council will have an opportunity to either adopt the plan, provide direction to staff for any revisions they want to see to the plan, or bring it back for consideration for adoption at a future meeting. With that, I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to Brian Ginter from Consor. Yeah, I'm Brian Ginter with Consor. With me is Emily Flock, room with Consor, and then Deb Gallardi. A quick overview of what we're going to cover today. First, talk about why we do a master plan. Included in it, description of the existing system and the historical investments that have been made in the water system, view the analysis and findings, and spend a little time summarizing the financial analysis and policy discussion. Why do a master plan? Always start with the most boring part, which is you have to do it. The state requires it. State law requires it. The Services Drinking Water Program requires every water system to meet a 20-year water system master plan. They're coming up on 20 years master plan. Master plan identifies short-term and long-term needs, primarily capital improvements that are required. It also addresses any policy updates that are required for the water system. And then most importantly, results in a financial strategy to be able to fund those capital. The goal of the plan is to improve the level of service to customers, supporting economic development, making sure that you have a reliable water system that we can respond to seismic and climate challenges. That we're planning for capacity expansion, very significantly for community the age of the Dalles, capital maintenance prioritization, and developer standards where there might be any changes to make sure that the water system remains resilient going forward.
So it's really a short and long-term roadmap for system improvements. All right, every 20 years, typically done about every 10 years as community with the improvements that are happening in the industrial area in particular is a community that should be looking at what's in the plan. It's kind of broken up into 4 parts. You should start with foundation. So it's sort of the background, the inventory of the system, what's included in it. We forecast water demands, how much water is going to be required in the future to make sure there's enough. We establish the performance criteria that are going to be used to analyze the system. Criteria are a combination of what's required by state law, what's industry standard, what's established by other professional organizations that help to guide sound operation of a water system. Then we do the system analysis. So we develop a hydraulic model, a computerized model of the water system to understand how flow occurs throughout the system and what the impact is on pressure. Supply and treatment needs analysis to make sure that you've got adequate water supply. Look at storage and pumping throughout the system, which are critical elements to make sure that water gets to customers when and where it's needed. We look at seismic and climate resiliency to make sure that we're planning for those kinds of those events that can impact the city in the future for the systems. Develop a capital improvement plan. So based on any deficiencies we identify through that analysis, come up with capital improvements for capacity, reliability, resilience categories. Then when that's done, Deb helps us with the financial analysis, really looking at what is it going to take to fund those improvements that are required, both in terms of utility rates and to make sure that system development charges are adequate. Only resulting in a full water system master plan report. That's the stuff that included. City council approval and then also regulatory approval. This plan will go to the Oregon Drinking Water Program for review once we've gotten. A quick summary of the overview of the system, and really the story here is about the historical investments that have been made in the water system, dating back to before 1900, 1890, the original purchase of the water system, the pipeline bringing water from Dog River over into the basin in 1913, 1940s water treatment plant improvement and pipeline into town, reservoirs throughout the city, the Crow Creek Dam in the 60s, and then the Garrison Road. What you see is on a cycle of every 30 to 50 years, there has been a need for significant investment as the community has grown, as infrastructure is needed to be renewed. Investment has been made here to make sure that there's adequate and safe, reliable water. Really, a lot of big generational investments have been made. Quick inventory of the system. I won't run through everything. The thing I want to hit on here is that in addition to the infrastructure you can see around town, steel reservoirs located around town, a number of pump stations, groundwater wells, almost 100 miles of pipe buried. Pipe does not last forever. And so got a lot of need for renewing aging infrastructure. There's a lot about the water system we take for granted that makes sure that when you turn on the tap, the water flows, and there's a fire on a building, firefighters can open up the water at the hydrant, put the fire out. So significant investment in staff time and infrastructure to be able to maintain a water system for a community.
Another piece of the water master plan is forecasting demands. So this shows your historical and projected average day demand, and that is the consumption over a full year divided by 365 days. So just the average use over a year. The blue in this shows the 2006, the previous master plans existing at that time and projected. So just to show that that your city has done excellent work in planning for the continued increase in demand. And you can see we're pretty on target with that, and then increasing with variety of growth that the city will see. This is the max day demand projection. So the maximum day demand represents the highest water use in a 24-hour period within a year. And this is typically occurs in July and August, occasionally like in 2021 with a heat dome in late June, that shifts. And This is often used for much of your sizing, and so supply is typically looked at the max day demand as well as peak season, get into that, and then reservoirs, pump stations all include a peaking factor for those higher. So many things are not sized for your average day demand. So this is generally a pretty important criteria that is used throughout the evaluation. So looking at the supply analysis, as we just talked about max day demand, one way to look at supply and evaluate supply is, can your supplies provide the maximum day demand throughout a year? The other piece is the annual or peak season supply. So you want to be able to make sure that you can supply your peak season when there's higher irrigation, summer, higher temperatures, and et cetera, and then lower demand in the winter. So primary limitations on the current city supply resources. So some of these, you pull water from Dog River, and so its stream flow physically is limiting to how much water you can pull. Climate precipitation snowpack changes were also evaluated. So projected that there will be less and less snowpack in your watersheds moving forward. There will be more, or it will fall as rain as opposed to snowpack, which changes when those flows sort of peak in your runoff and are available for you to collect. You have a water right on South Fork Mill Creek. That is the limitation off of that source. Raw water storage capacity. So behind Crow Creek Dam is a limitation to be aware of. Constraint. The Wicks treatment plant conditioning capacity also plays into the system. And then the sustainability of your groundwater. The current wells are in a critical groundwater area as defined by OWRD. So there are a range of supply, and there are quite a few pieces that play together to paint the full picture of what's available for the city. Age and condition of existing infrastructure is extremely relevant for the Dalles right now. The Wicks water treatment plant and the transmission main. On the next slide. So both of these, the treatment plant as well as transmission mains, have been serving the city for nearly 75 years. And the treatment plant in particular, there was a condition assessment completed as well as a structural assessment on the existing plant and structures to understand what it would take to do rehabilitation of that plant rather than just a new one. So that was part of the consideration and is part of the analysis on the treatment plant in the master plan. And then the transmission mains are 75 years old, and they also were not designed for areas of high pressure, which has operational implications because your plant is at a much higher elevation than the city. There can be areas of high pressure throughout that main, and so operators are very careful to maintain flows and pressures within that pipeline within the operable. So looking at expansion options, we looked at expanded raw water storage, aquifer recharge licensing, the AR, aquifer storage and recharge potential, the Columbia River water rights, and deep groundwater. And so I will start with deep groundwater. We looked, and there are a few wells, although limited data in the area of groundwater. And so this would be an aquifer that is at a lower depth than what your current wells pull from. It would be a separate source from that. And current, what is available suggests that this is not overly sustainable, and it also will decline if you are pulling at the rates that we are suggesting you need long-term. So it's not a particularly great investment for the long-term sustainability and capacity of it. The Columbia River water right is a viable option and will continue to be a viable option. There are a lot of pieces that come about that. One in particular is you don't have infrastructure to serve that. So there's no infrastructure to take it out of the river. There's no current treatment infrastructure. There's no distribution transmission main. So it would be a separate source. And with the way your system is run, it would not be economical to run two systems at once. So if you were to switch over to the Columbia River, you would more than likely be not using the treatment plant and all your source coming up from Dog River, et cetera. It makes sense to run both of those at the same time. And I will hit on expanded raw water, AR licensing, and ASR potential. They are all pieces of the recommended path forward for supply, long-term supply.
I would just offer that the Columbia River water right has another challenge, which is a federal requirement that any new withdrawals find a mechanism for what they call bucket for bucket replacement. If we want to take 1 million gallons a day of water out of the Columbia River, we have to find a way to put 1 million gallons a day of water in the river upstream from where we want to take it out. And that is a very significant challenge to developing use on the Columbia River under the current federal regulations.
So looking at supply recommendations, the first sort of short-term steps would be optimizing the existing systems. There's a water right transfer to the Riverside wells to make sure that the design capacity can be met by your water rights. ASR is part of the Riverside wells, and so there's monitoring and testing plans for those wells. So that would be one of the next steps that should start here early in the new year. And then applying for an aquifer recharge limited license or permit on the South Fork Mill Creek is another recommendation. And this would increase water that is available in winter to recharge your groundwater aquifer, which helps offset that critical groundwater area and the sustainability of that source for your wells during peak season. Addressing aging condition, the Wicks water treatment plant is recommended to be replaced and expanded, and that would be the finished water transmission mains replacement would come after that treatment plant. And then long-term supply needs, there's a variety of unknowns with the ASR program. And so once some of that operations and monitoring and pilot testing is completed, we recommend looking at a larger ASR program planning and understanding what piece that will play in your overall supply and resiliency plans. The Crow Creek Dam needs an update on seismic evaluation as well as its emergency action plan. And that dam was studied in the 90s. And so we're recommending that you complete a conceptual design update for the expansion of the dam as well as spillway improvements. The spillway is undersized for the peak maximum flows that dam is potentially going to see. And then understanding current dam safety requirements and what that means for the design update is a critical piece to allow you to understand if and when that expansion project comes up, what is that going to look like? And then as Brian mentioned, regular updates to the master planning and financial planning elements. There's also a range of ways that your demand, how fast your demand grows and things like that can change. We can't totally predict those. So every so often those should be updated and looked at to understand where sort of on your supply trajectory you are. And long-term needs, the Crow Creek Dam raise is still something that is far out. And so we would expect that if everything goes to planning and if ASR is relatively beneficial, and we would think that that is somewhere out beyond the 20-year. So those costs are not in your 20-year capital improvement plan with the other pieces of supply recommendations.
The distribution system side, we have a far less daunting list. It's really typical renewal and replacement and some upside. So storage at the Riverside area, reservoir recoding and relining and garrison, booster pump station improvements, a number of fire flow improvements. These are pretty standard in every water system. 6-inch pipes that were built all the way up into the 80s now really need to be 8-inch pipe to meet current fire flow requirements. Or number of small resilience improvements. Mostly that's renewal. Our piping that's been in the ground for 50 to 75 years. Placed, there's a lot of it in the ongoing program beyond all of our lifetimes. Smaller list, very typical of every water system. Some capacity, at least needed. Graphically illustrating all the improvements we described. The top priority improvements in the first 10 years are in the salmon or pink color. This is the most significant piece because it is the replacement of the water treatment plant and major infrastructure investment 10 years. After that, in the 11 to 20 years, we're back to more of the typical distribution system improvements. So $37 million. And then beyond the 20-year horizon, in the 20 to 30-year window, we've got the $90 of additions, just new replacement. So this is a significant CIP. We're at a point where it's time for the city to make another round of generational investments going forward in the infrastructure, at least in some cases for 75. That tease it up to hand it over to Deb to talk a little bit about strategy for paying for all of it.
Thanks, Brian. Deb Gallardi, Gallardi Rothstein Group for the record. If you can advance one more time there. The financial analysis framework was comprehensive look at the rates and charges to ensure that there could be adequate revenue to fund the system capital improvements, which Brian and Emily discussed, as well as ongoing operations. And also important is equitable cost recovery, both with respect to existing and future development, as well as different customers of the system. So we conducted a cost of service analysis to evaluate how the rate increases would be applied to different customer classes. And then finally, the rate design looks at developing rates that meet a variety of objectives, including enhancing the city's grant and loan eligibility, affordability, and rate stability. Next slide, please. Obviously, the capital improvement plan dominates the financial plan over the next 20 years. As Brian said, these are generational investments that when you add prospective inflation probably will exceed $250 million. The current rates and SDCs have very limited capital funding capacity, less than $500,000. The city hasn't raised rates since 2014. So there is additional capacity that needs to be developed in the rates in order to fund these improvements. The good news is there are opportunities to leverage federal funding programs and local revenue sources to help offset what otherwise would need to be rate increases. The Water Infrastructure Finance Innovation Act loan program, WIFIA, will most likely be available to the city to debt fund a significant portion of the project costs. And the City County Strategic Investment Program funds of $3 million a year are assumed to be applied to capital improvements and debt service during that same period. Industrial growth, which has in part been why the city hasn't needed to raise rates since 2014, is projected to continue to expand and add additional capacity to pay for capital improvements and ongoing operation and maintenance costs. Next slide, please. But there will still need to be rate increases in order to grow the ability of the city to pay for both the WIFIA debt and other debt service, as well as just paying as you go for renewal and replacement type infrastructure. Right now, the estimated debt is $10 million per year. So you can see that the teal blue line or bars there, that's the capital that grows significantly over the next 20 years. So in combination with the SIP funds, the $3 million per year, and the assumed debt funding, the projected rate increases are 7.3% per year in the first 10 years, and then are expected to moderate to more inflationary levels after that. Again, the rates haven't been increased since 2014. So, and you can see in that very first bar that there's very little teal, that's the capital component. Without the SIP funds, we had estimated that the rate increase would need to be about 50% higher. Next slide, please. So considering how that general rate increase of 7.3% could be applied then to the different customer classes, we conducted the cost of service analysis. And under cost of service, as Brian mentioned, there are a number of different services provided to customers, includes fire protection, meeting peak demands. There's emergency storage requirements, ASR system to provide additional demand. And so we're able to evaluate what types of customers are driving each of those categories of costs and allocate those costs specifically in proportion to customer use. We followed standard industry practices in establishing the framework for the cost of service and consider the city's specific facilities and design criteria. Next slide. So the cost of service shows somewhat of a shift in revenue recovery from residential customers to non-residential, which includes both industrial and commercial. This chart shows in the orange, that's the residential portion of revenue, which is currently about 51% of total. And sorry, that's the non-residential is 51%. And that increases under the cost of service to 54%. That also continues to increase in the future, both driven by anticipated industrial water use. So just even without a change in the cost of service, there would be some growing proportion of non-residential rate revenue reflecting that increased usage. So, but also under the cost of service, there's some minor additional increase through the cost of service period, which looked at 2031. As Brian and Emily mentioned, it's really important to continue to update the analysis as both the city looks more to establish the capital financing program for these improvements, and as the industrial, in particular, growth is anticipated. Next slide. So this chart, really the most column is the far right column. It just shows how that 7.3% general increase generally gets applied on an average annual basis to residential and non-residential. And as I mentioned, based on the cost of service, non-residential goes up and 7.3 to 8.5% per year, reflecting that the change in the cost of service, and the residential goes up less than the 7.3%. Next slide. The final component is the rate structure. The current rates include both a fixed base charge and a volume charge that is applied over and above the quantity that's included in the base charge. The current base charge is 10,000 gallons per month for residential customers, and approximately 70% of residential bills use less than 10,000 gallons. For commercial, the minimum quantity included in the base is 5,000 gallons. And so it's about half of residential. And the base charges vary by meter size. Next slide. The updated structure that's presented here based on prior deliberation with council and looking at different alternatives is to reduce the quantity that's included in the base rate for residential from 10,000 gallons to 7,500 gallons. That 7,500 gallons represents about the median use for residential customers, so about 50% use less and 50% use more. So it's approaching what's more common in the industry and what was noted by the lending agencies as being a more modern rate structure and sending important price signals about water conservation. So under that, and so this chart then shows the impact of both the rate structure change, which you can see initially in the fiscal year 24-25 under the revised cost of service, that reducing that base rate or reducing that minimum quantity also reduces the base rate slightly and increases the volume rate, because we have the 7.3% overall revenue increase that is also part of these numbers. But that means that generally for a residential customer, most customers would see a bill decrease overall with that reduction in the base rate, and only the largest users would see a bill increase in that first year. And that's due to the volume rate going up, and also because more of the water used, an additional 2,500 gallons, would be subject to those volume rates. And the next year, you can see that for the fiscal year 25-26, that the rate increase, the bill increases would be more uniform across the different usage levels, because you've already made that cost of service shift. And as I mentioned before, the rate increases for residential continue to be less than the 7.3% overall increase. Next slide. For non-residential, there's no change to the minimum quantity that's recommended. It maintained at 5,000, but there is a change in the base rate meter factors to reflect current meter hydraulic capacity standards, as well as the cost of service analysis, which modified what portion of the base charges and the types of costs that are included in the base rate, which of those scale with the meter size and which of those are applied uniformly to all customers. So what that means is the base rates for, and because there's no decrease in the quantity that's included, but there's an increase in the cost components and the meter factors, the base rates increase more for larger meter sizes than for the smaller meters. And so you can see that for under the revised cost of service for different meter sizes shown here, 3/4 inch, 2 inch, 4 inch, and different quantities for a small user, a medium user, and a much larger user, that in the first year, unlike residential, which actually went down slightly, these rates go up anywhere from 6.4 to 14%. And that higher percent reflects those larger meter sizes. And then what's shown there, again, for comparison, is that FY 25-26 bill increase, which again is more consistent across the customers, but is also generally higher than the 7.3%. So this mix of, and it's really going to depend on the customer's specific meter size and their usage. But for this sample of customers, it's anywhere from 6.7% to 8.1% in the second year. Okay, next slide. Just to provide a comparison with other communities, the dark blue bars are the Dalles, the updated and the current. For the 10,000 gallon a month user, the updated is the higher bill. And so it's still to the left of the median of this group of surveyed communities. It would be, currently it's slightly lower than Bend. Under the revised, it's slightly higher than Bend, but overall doesn't shift significantly in terms of the order or the rank. The next slide shows a 5,000 gallon per month user, which is slightly to the right of the median. And that's because of the higher base charge. With the reduction in the base charge, the slight reduction in the base charge, it's not enough to move that customer bill anymore in terms of the order, but it, as we showed, it does decrease the bill for the smaller users. The next slide shows a non-residential bill comparison. And so here we've got commercial and industrial customers. Again, it's a range of meter sizes. Residential customers are mostly served based on 3/4 inch meter. With commercial and industrial, it really varies significantly. And while the commercial and industrial rates go up more than the residential for the Dalles based on the cost of service analysis, the bills are still the lowest of the communities that are shown here. And these communities were selected because they do have larger industrial customers in all cases. And so with the exception of the large 8-inch meter, and the large 6-inch meter, even, they're the lowest rates of those shown, except for with Hood River for the 6-inch and the large 8-inch, which actually Hood River doesn't have any 8-inch. So still competitive rates, even with those, the initial increase and the change in the cost of service. Okay, I think we've got one more slide for the financial. So just to summarize, the projected average annual revenue increase of 7.3% is estimated for the next 10 years to grow the rates to fund the greater than 250 million CIP and keep pace with general inflation. I characterize this financial plan as a medium case, not a best case, not a worst case in terms of our assumptions that we used. It's my hope that when you finalize the capital financing agreement with WIFIA, most likely, as well as the other components of that these rate increases may be able to be lowered in the future. But for purposes of planning, the 7.3% is our best estimate at this point in time. As I said, the commitment of $3 million of SIP or general fund funding over the next, through the life of the debt has a significant impact on keeping the rates lower than they otherwise would be and reducing customer bill impacts. The cost of service analysis results in slightly higher rate increases for non-residential and lower for residential. And the reduction in the residential quantity allowance to 7.5 thousand gallons will lead to modest bill reductions for many customers initially and modest increases for large customers. The revised water meter factors result in larger increases in the base rates for non-residential customers with meter sizes of 2-inch and larger. The final component of the systems development charge we did look at, and like the rates, to fund a portion of the significant capital investment, the maximum rate did increase significantly for a systems development charge, the charge on new development. But the city will consider this further as part of its ongoing evaluation of housing and other development needs. So we'll be documenting that analysis such that if the city wants to move forward with those increases at some point in the future, you have that. And I think that's it.
Evan, that does wrap up the formal presentation.
Thank you.
I think I'd just offer one additional point of clarification. In Deb's presentation, she talked about $3 million worth of SIP. And I know that staff and the council know what that is, but this is a public meeting, that might be new information. SIP stands for the Strategic Investment Program. These are funds that are being received from Google as part of the development agreement for the new data centers that are under construction. So the council had tentatively given direction to staff to develop these water system financials to anticipate that $3 million a year is going to be coming from these development incentives and future general fund tax revenues to help fund this water system and mitigate what would have otherwise been significantly larger rate increases. So I just wanted to provide that additional context as we were talking about SIP and pointing out $3 million of annual contributions. With that, I think we're ready to take any questions before council might take public comment.
Well, before I call on the others, I just want to follow up with what you just said. On page 230, in the second paragraph down, I'm going to read this. Without the contribution of SIP funding from the data centers, the first 2 years of water rate increases for city residents and businesses would have been about 31 to 38%.
Yes.
So there you go. All right.
Thank you.
Questions and comments from the city council? It's almost as if we haven't discussed this before.
Here, down the shore.
I refer back to the councilor's comment earlier. It's not that the council's not curious. This is the fourth time we've met with you on this.
Mention the fact this is the fourth public meeting about this. We also have had 3 joint meetings with the county where this was discussed extensively about the need for what the city needs to do with its share of the Google money. We also, as the staff report has indicated, a creation of a new webpage to talk about this issue.
Yeah, we got that posted, I believe, just before Thanksgiving, and the plan posted just before Thanksgiving. I did ask Amy just a little bit ago. There was an opportunity to provide comments through that webpage, and none have been received in that week and a half or so.
We've also had press releases, newspaper articles that have been published, articles on social media. I know I've done several radio interviews where I've mentioned it, as well as other, I'm sure, elected officials have done the same.
I've done one radio interview. I've spoken to one local service group. So we've been trying to let folks know that this is a conversation that's underway right now.
Okay. Anybody else on the council have a comment or question?
I just think people don't, I mean, there's nothing else we can do. We've done everything we can, but I think people hear this and their eyes kind of glaze over water system master plan until they hear about the rate increase. I think the only thing less sexy on my time in the council is my first meeting on was wastewater treatment. And we were talking about sludge right after dinner.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
I remember that.
No offense to Dan Spots, but this staff report was a little more exciting than the one on the urban renewal current financing. Just a little bit.
Mr. Mayor, if I may.
Yes, Mr. Klebs.
If the council does adopt the water master plan this evening, we have a special city council meeting a week from today in the same place, same time. And staff intends to bring a resolution memorializing some of the contributions of the SIP agreement to the water master plan, along with other budgetary guidance for staff that we will use in the upcoming budget cycle. So that'll be, we'll be talking a little bit more about this next week, should we move forward with the water master plan tonight.
And I guess the other thing I would offer just in terms of timing is, again, if the plan is adopted tonight, I believe staff is poised to be able to update its fee schedule and make any water rate adjustments effective probably around February 1st. And it's desirable to do water utility rate adjustments in the winter so that people have, some opportunity, some awareness, some chances to make decisions rather than in the summer where they're already at peak demand and their bill adjusts significantly.
I did have one question on page 229, last paragraph down, where you talk about the large amount of water in our base rate. And you indicate that it's problematic when applying for state and federal funding. Could you explain that a little more?
I certainly can. So when we were applying for funding for the Dog River Pipeline project, one of the sources of funding that we were looking at was what they call the Safe Drinking Water Revolving Loan Fund. These are monies that start out as federal funds and are administered by the state and allocated to different businesses. And one of the things they want to know is what is your current residential monthly rate? And they want to equalize that to a volume of 7,500 gallons. So that way, if somebody includes no water in their base rate, they take the base rate and add the consumptive rate for 7,500 gallons, or, prorated accordingly if it's a different amount. Ours was 10,000 gallons. And so their first tendency was to say, okay, well, I want to take this water rate and adjust it downward by 25% and say that's what the citizen would pay for 7,500. And at their adjusted rate, we would not have shown having a high enough rate. Our people would not have been paying enough for their water for us to qualify for the best loan financing that was available. We would have only qualified for 20-year funding at 2.6%. It took about 2 months of conversation with them to say, no, you can't prorate this down, because even if a person only used 7,500, they still pay for 10,000 gallons. That's $55 a month is what they pay. And it took, like I say, a fair amount of conversation for them to finally acknowledge that at the rate for the full 10,000 gallons of $55, our rates were high enough to qualify for better financing, and we got 1% at 30-year terms. That was the experience that we had that I'm referring to with that comment in the staff report.
Okay. Thanks for explaining that a little better. Other comments or questions? Anybody like? Council Richardson?
Yes to all three. I'll comment, I'll question, I'll make a motion. Thanks. Obviously, it's obvious to at least those of us on council and familiar with the report that an awful lot of work and technical insight has gone into this report, and I appreciate that. It's if not the biggest issue for our edge of the desert city to be on top of, it's certainly one of them, is our water supply. And I feel like this sets in motion not just a very big and complex process, but also one that I'm hopeful, I'm confident will strengthen our water system. So I support it. I do want to just sort of take another whack at this this horse that we talked about a little bit. I hope everybody else has seen the questions and answers that came out. One of those was, does it make any sense to explore using the Columbia River water right that we have? You've already kind of answered that, but I want to just really drill down into that. Are you confident that it makes no sense, or do you feel like it?
I'm pretty confident it makes no sense at this point. And the reason is that I mentioned earlier some of the challenges of meeting the federal requirements. Brian and Emily touched on the fact that we don't have the infrastructure in place. So all new infrastructure would have to be built to switch from a water source that's at the top of our system to a water source that's at the bottom of our system. So that's an expense that likely equals the cost that we've got to replace what we have, but keep the direction of flow and use the water sources, watershed, use water from the watershed as our source. In addition to those costs, we would have to pay for whatever the mechanism would be for the bucket for bucket, whether that's go somewhere upstream on the Columbia and pay to completely reline some sort of an open irrigation district that's leaking, or system that's leaking, and then make the case that, we're saving 26 million gallons a day or some lesser amount in the meantime. And then that water is available to flow down to us for our use and withdrawal. Those costs would be in addition to basically mimicking the costs we've already identified in the plan to enhance our use of the watershed source. Now, that's my take on it. I'll let the professionals add their take.
Sure, but let's specify really what is at the heart of my question. Is not should we drink the Columbia River water. The question really is, should we tap that? Does it make any sense to explore tapping that water right for industrial use?
And so those same
big industrial users right there, and we could actually potentially, in concept, save drinking water. But I take your point.
Yeah, and so I think the same concept applies. To do that, there would still have to be treatment facilities So we would have, if we I understand your question correctly, we might continue to use the watershed and a treatment plant at the Wicks facility to supply most of the city, and industrial users might use the Columbia River for some of their purposes. So there would also still have to be the improvements we're talking about, a separate pump station and separate treatment facility to serve the port. And we would still have to find a way to do this bucket for bucket thing. We did actually, spend some time on that early in the evaluation of supplying to data centers. We looked at that option, and again, it just seemed to be not economically feasible, and maybe even not even technically feasible at that time.
Thank you, Dave.
Wouldn't using the current system using gravitational force from an upper elevation, if you pump from the Columbia, you would have to add additional pump stations, electrical use.
Yeah, you would certainly have some additional operational costs because you're, again, drawing water from the bottom of the system and having it lifted up, where we do benefit right now from a largely gravity supply system.
Right.
And again, I just see nodding over there. If you have anything else to add, those have been our thoughts on it over the years.
Is often the case, your public works director had the answer.
Okay. Did I hear you indicate that you were going to make a motion?
Mr. Mayor, I
Yes.
think you wanted to put, or I think we intended to allow some public comment.
Yeah, I just wanted to cut him, just in case
Oh.
you wanted to,
I'd like to wait until everyone's had their say.
anybody in the audience like to comment on this very important topic? Anybody? Okay, looks like nobody wants to say anything. Is there a motion anybody would like to make at this point?
Sure. Mr. Mayor, I'd move to adopt the 2024 Water System Master Plan update.
Long will second that.
It's been moved by Councilor Richardson and seconded by Councilor Long to adopt the 2024 updated Water Master Plan. Is there any more discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Is there any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much, Mr. Anderson. Thank you very much, Mr. and Ms. Consultant, and Ms. Gallardi. Thank you very much. Okay, moving on to 10B, which is consideration of an ordinance amending the code related to short-term rental licenses. Mr. Chandler.
Thank you. Mayor Mays, Councilors Joshua Chandler, Community Development Department. I am presenting to you a continuation of, I think it's, I don't know, maybe the 6th time we've chatted about short-term rentals in the past 18 months or something. This is a continuation from our very last meeting. So there was staff proposed some ordinance amendments in October. We took those back, and at the November 25th meeting, we brought other considerations in front of you. We made some small, I think, minor changes to those, bringing them back in front of you today. Those changes this time around include modifications to our vicinity requirement. So the vicinity requirement is going to be, we discussed last time around, a 500 foot. This time it's a 300 foot. That change would then, we would keep our notification at 500 feet. And then the mandatory posting that we had talked about last time, we had it visible from the street. We were going to remove that from being visible from the street. So now it's just at the front door on the interior of the building. Those were the changes that we discussed. I did want to put something in here too. We did receive a comment and actually talked to one of our operators, and to provide a little bit of a clarification, we talked about these fee increases for the additional administrative costs for mailing out short-term rentals. Well, short-term rentals, the mail-outs actually only occur with that initial licensure. So we believe that that initial license will be the one that receives the increased fee, whereas continued, licenses now, the renewal fee is what's currently set. Of course, this isn't a decision tonight that we'll be discussing for fee increases, but just wanted to provide that information to you. If it's a brand new application, we will apply the additional fee increase, or if it's not, we will just continue on with what it is now. And that is about it. My apologies. I'm a little shuffled with these two applications in here. And I would recommend approval of ordinance 24-1407B, and happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Chandler?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor.
Counselor Runyon.
So one of the things we talked about was this 1 hour response thing. Is that in here somewhere? I'm not seeing it. And I'm not in favor of it at all.
Yeah, so there it is in here. That was not one of the changes we decided to make last time around, but it is. Let me find the exact code section for you. It was 24 hours previously, so it has been shortened to 1 hour. It is in section 8.02.050E. That is on page 659 of your packet.
To the council, I just find that extraordinarily high bar for any business to try and compete with. If it's a legal issue, the police department and fire departments and whoever's needed will be there to handle those things. And, you know, we've received one note. I went back through a lot of the letters. One of them was at White Salmon. I think they have a 12-hour return on those types of other things, nuisance claims, that kind of thing, by ownership. These people, by and large, are good business people that are trying to do something good here in the community. And it seems like an hour is just, I think of all the times during this time of year when people are gone hunting, no cell service, you know, we're also used to carrying a phone on our hip, but an hour just may not be reasonable, in my opinion.
I thought we had talked about this a little, and I was a little surprised to see the 1 hour in there myself, but would you, how do you feel about 24 hours?
That or somewhere in between, like I say, 12 hours is used at White Salmon from what I've read, but, you know, I just think it's the kinds of things that are going to fall under that should be a little more lenient to the business involved who have never had complaints of any kind.
Yeah, quick clarification. The city of White Salmon actually does not have a 12-hour. What's being requested from this individual who provided comment, that was their suggestion, was 12-hour.
Okay.
Currently, what the city of White Salmon has is no set timeline. They just has it needs to be reasonable and timely.
There you go.
Therefore, they have establishing a process for the administration to enforce, interpret, and clarify that section of the ordinance. So that would keep the door open for any member of administration to say it's 1 hour or it's 24 hours. They can flex it. The city of Hood River, on the other hand, is a half an hour.
Really?
When we first talked about this,
I probably put the wrong town with the wrong letter or something, but
I think on there it was they looked up, this individual looked up a couple of them, and their suggestion out of it was 12 hours. But 24 hours is currently what the code currently reads. So.
How long?
well, when we first talked about this and created the ordinance, one of the things we talked about was people being able to designate someone else as their point of contact if they were themselves not available.
And yeah, they
I mean,
can.
I get an hour is too short because it might be just a temporary thing, but seems like 24 hours on something that might be a 48 or 72-hour stay be a little long.
The other idea around it is, I mean, Councilor Runyon, you hit on it. If it's an emergency, you contact the police department. However, I think we're looking at real emergencies should be contacting the police department. If there is an issue going on with an event being held, that is why we would be requesting to get a hold of the individual sooner than a 24-hour notice. 24-hour notice, if they're available within 24 hours, the issue could have been resolved. So that is one of the reasons we went forward with this. And yeah, otherwise we, happy to take it back to what it currently is or just not make that change.
How does everybody feel about 12? It sounds like you think 24 is too long.
Like the timely and not maybe setting a time limit on that. I don't know. But I would settle on 12. It seems a little bit more reasonable than 1 hour.
Counselor Long?
I'm pretty flexible on that. I just wanted to bring that up. And I know that some of the comments we got were, why are you guys being so punitive forward? And I think we're not trying to be that way based on what's happening, but I think we're also trying to do what we did last time, which is anticipate what might come down the road if there is somebody who isn't as good of a actor as what we have now. We don't have any guarantee of how future operators will act.
We've
I
also
think-
put out there to review the whole thing a year from now. So whatever we put there, we can look at again.
What I've observed is that over the past year or year and a half, we've had much exchange of communication and improvements between operators and residents. I think that has happened. It's been a natural, and I think the number of incidences have gone down. And I think that this would just allow having something in writing that clarifies is a good step. But to be too punitive goes one step too far. And I would, in going back, I think I'm looking at some of the things that have come in, some correspondence. And besides the one notification, there's also screening about an abutment, and the operator must make reasonable precaution to mitigate impacts of the surrounding neighborhood. I think I heard that, requirements of a fence between two properties was required in the early stages of development on one piece of property. What do you say about this screening ordinance that they're questioning because it said it would be a burden on them and some of the other property owners? See, what we're trying to do is you try to fit everything into one mold, and it doesn't always fit, as we found out at last council meeting, that some operators were impacted differently than others. So what we want to do is try to bring some conformity, reasonable, so that everybody can survive, the operators and the residents. That's what we're trying to do.
Right. Yeah, with the screening requirement, it's currently in the code. We just clarified it.
Right.
So we can strike that if you'd like. This really came to be from a previous Airbnb that was operating. This was, I think, in 2019. There was one of the concerns that came up that we actually, when we were approving an old bed and breakfast and vacation rental permit, there was a property that shared. It was basically just an open yard into backyards of, in a neighborhood. We required a fence of that at that time. And it was just something that we recommended back in 2020 when we added into the code. What we're changing here is just adding, just clarifying it a bit more, but happy to strike that out. There is, if you don't have a fence between your neighboring property and you do have guests from an Airbnb, who knows? That is just a concern that we addressed at that time that then made it into the ordinance.
Another issue is that, we can put this together, an ordinance now, and it's in place, but we also have the right and the responsibility to come back in the future. If something's not working, we can always come back to refine in the future, another year or two.
Well,
So,
yeah, we just already decided that it would be 1 year.
1 year,
Councilor
so-
Runyon pointed that out, so.
And you're gonna have grandfather issues, like you didn't require a fence, now you're gonna require a fence.
yeah. What it's trying to do is to try to impose some type of communication so that people can resolve the issues before they got to the level of issues that we had 2 years ago, maybe. And that's the reason that we're doing this, is to come back. What I also discovered was that the impact we hadn't taken into consideration. We were only looking at one particular group or another group, but there were isolated individuals that the imposition of the ordinance would have a major impact on their operation. And especially if we put in a term of 5 years or 7 years so that conformity, that would have caused major problems, in my opinion. So I think there was one more, was the it was the fee schedule, and you clarified that tonight. So I think that took care of that. I think we're really close. I think with just modifying a little bit here and there and tweaking, I think we can have something come up with a doable that everybody, they're not going to be happy on either side, but at least we find some middle ground where we can all just get along.
Well, I think the intent was, after meeting 6 times on this at least, that we would pass something tonight. Now, the council,
Be the hope.
if you don't want to pass it tonight, we can put it off till January, whatever. The other option is to pass it as amend the 1 hour to 12 hours or whatever. So it sounds like that's the only,
That's the only thing that the rest of it, I think, has been answered.
I don't know if
Councilor Runyon?
if we
I'm sorry.
addressed the screening, did you want to make a
Oh, the
modification
screening.
to that?
That was, let me think. Let me look. Go ahead, Councilor Runyon.
Just a clarification, because we've talked about 300 feet and notification is pretty well clearly noticed. So 300 feet in any direction from that house, is that what we're talking about for notification, or down the street?
It's any direction from the
So it
property.
okay.
Yep.
And location of new licensed folks, they can't be within,
300 feet in a residential zone and then 100 feet in one of the commercial zones.
okay. And again, that's any direction.
Correct. Yep. I'm just drawing basically a bubble.
I got looking at a map, and in a neighborhood with several streets, all of a sudden we're 2 streets away. And, that's one of the things I think we're going to be reviewing big time in a year.
Right.
Yeah, it doesn't take into account the Dalles topography either. I mean, you could be looking at a property located on scenic. Is it really impacting the property on the lower bluff? You may be within that
Radius.
vicinity, but
Am I correct to the average lot size in this community is 50 by 100 deep?
that's kind of like our standard. Yeah, once you start getting up into the foothills,
So if you visualize 300 feet, now we're to the next street and part of the way at least to the 3rd street beyond or 2nd street beyond. So it'll be something we're going to be coming back to, I think. Mark my words.
Going back to the screening issue at the bottom, this operator said, this requirement may be waived upon written approval of all adjoining property owners. Maybe that's a way out of that one.
Yeah, and that's been in place. That basically is if you abut a property and there's no issues with your neighbor, it's a pretty simple process to go through. Just sign it. I think the concern was if you don't have it, if I get along with my neighbor now and I have a new neighbor that moves in and they have a problem with me, this is at time of initial approval as well. So you're getting that approval. And then just like the notification, you're not going back every single year and redoing it, because we're trying to streamline the process too. The initial application, it requires quite a bit of information, and now we have just a renewal process online, pretty easy application to fill out. So we're trying to streamline those renewals, make it quicker and easier for us too.
So just to clarify, to me anyway, screening's required unless the adjoining neighbor, the abutting neighbors say it's not an issue.
Correct.
I would like to conclude for thanking you for taking consideration of input from people, from citizens, and trying to work out the details. I think you've done a terrific job. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we could approve this, Mr. Mayor, with that one amendment about notification, the 12-hour. Yeah.
Okay, before we make a motion, is there anyone in the audience who would like to weigh in on this issue? Thank goodness. Great, thank you. Okay, would anybody like to make a motion?
I don't have it in front of me, or I would.
Either looking.
Mr. Mayor, I move to adopt General Ordinance number 24-1407B as presented by title only.
With the amendment.
The amendment.
With the amendment of 12 hours notification.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
It's been moved by Counselor Randall and seconded by Counselor Runyon to adopt the ordinance regarding short-term rentals by title only. Is there anyone on the city council who would like to hear the ordinance read in its entirety?
No.
Okay, will the city clerk please read the ordinance by title only?
General Ordinance number 24-1407B, an ordinance amending the Dalles Municipal Code, Chapter 8.02, short-term rental license.
With the understanding that we were amending the proposal to go with a 12-hour notification.
Yep.
Okay. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Mr. Chandler. I'd like to echo the words of Councilor McLaughlin. Nice job. Okay. Okay, we're going to go into executive session. I'm going to have to read this notification, and after that, we're going to take a recess. Amy, is the executive session here or in the conference room? Okay. City Council of the City of the Dalles will now meet in executive session in accordance with ORS 192.6602H to consult with counsel regarding the legal rights and duties of a public body with regard to current litigation or litigation likely to be filed. Representatives of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive session. Other members of the audience are asked not to go to the conference room. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on or otherwise disclose any of the deliberations or anything said about these subjects during the executive session, except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. No final decision may be made in executive session. At the end of the executive session, we will return here to open session and welcome the audience back into the room. We expect to return to open session in about 30 minutes.